All right, everyone. Mr. Woodard ran us through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Again, an important concept that's referenced a lot, not just in the psychology world, but in the world around us. And we're hearing a lot about it actually right now in these times of COVID, believe it or not. He did leave off before getting to an important slide. Speaking of these days of COVID, they've added a layer to Maslow's hierarchy. Let's see if I can pull it up here. There it is. Thank you, Mr. Woodard, for the humor. All right. Psychologists are very interested, again, in what drives people to act in a certain way. What motivates us, and again, what drives us? What biological needs do we have? And Mr. Woodard talked a little bit about both hunger and sex in his first video. So we want to look at those two topics briefly today. And again, from a psychologist's standpoint, we want to start thinking, okay, why do people eat in a certain way? Why do people approach sex in a certain way? One of the things that psychologists are going to start looking at are eating disorders. What happens, and go back to that idea of homeostasis. What happens when we start to do things that are against Maslow's hierarchy, as far as we start kind of going against our own biological needs? What happens when we actually start messing around a little bit with our body's natural homeostasis? And what we do know about eating disorders is that there's often a genetic component involved. So our genetic makeup is driving us to those types of disorders. Anorexia is actually the deadliest mental disorder, and it is a mental disorder. It's not really a true eating disorder in the sense of it's not the stomach that is that there's an issue with. It's something mentally that's going on. And this brings me to an important point. We're going to go into disorders toward the end of the year, but as we use that term in psychology, remember, psychology does not use that term in a negative way. There should in no way, when somebody has a disorder, it's not something that should be viewed in a negative light. Again, kind of go back to that idea of homeostasis. What is happening that is not the usual order in the brain or the body? There's a disorder. Something's being thrown off a little bit there. So psychologists want to look at, okay, well, why would somebody develop anorexia? There's actually a heavy social component that is often associated with anorexia. And usually with treating an anorexic patient, you're going to have both a dietitian and a psychologist on board to kind of holistically help somebody in that situation. Healthy permanent weight loss is extremely difficult, and this takes me back to that idea of homeostasis, or what the book is also going to call our set point. And genetically, we have a set point. Our bodies are wired to have a place where we function at the best we can possibly function at a particular weight. Well, what's happened is, think back to Mr. Woodard's evolutionary theory. What's happened is our bodies were made for one system, but as we've evolved, we've developed other things that are kind of messing around with that original system. So to make it kind of easy example, fat cells, okay? They're called adipocytes. Fat cells originally are going to store up fat, energy, reserve stuff for like the winter months when there's no food around, or when you have to wait to make a hunt, or where you have to wait for the berries to fall in the spring, to ripen in the spring. So what's happened is they didn't have grocery stores back then. So the fat cells originally were created to store. And they're also finding that those fat cells actually do a lot of talking to the rest of the body. They regulate a lot of hormones in the rest of the body. Well, over the years, we've developed grocery stores. We've developed processed foods. And the book talks about this. So we've kind of altered the original jobs of our bodies. And the body still, from an evolutionary standpoint, is kind of trying to figure this out. So that all being said, when you start looking at things like weight loss, it's becoming harder and harder because we're adjusting set points in our bodies. we become overweight, and it's hard. Basically, what's happened is if we become overweight and we don't address it soon enough, we'll readjust the body's set point, because we have things like fat cells going, oh, I'm supposed to store, I'm supposed to keep storing, and it's hard to retrain those cells to do something different. The book has a nice box in it, a little side box that talks about different ways of approaching weight loss in a healthy manner. All right, your main hunger hormones that you have to know about. Insulin, that's the famous one. It controls blood sugar. It's famous because of its association with diabetes. Mnemonic devices. We'll talk about them when we get to the memory unit, but it's easy ways to remember things. Mr. Woodard has a great mnemonic device for ghrelin. It's the gremlin that makes you hungry. It's a hunger hormone that is released that makes you hungry. Okay, I like that idea of the gremlin that makes you hungry. It's an easy way to remember ghrelin. Okay. Oh, another one for ghrelin, and thanks to my wife for cool words like adipocytes. She's a dietitian. Her mnemonic device that she teaches to her college students, ghrelin, think about it, makes you go grrr, your stomach goes grrr. So ghrelin makes you hungry, okay? Orexin is a hunger hormone, also makes you hungry. If you look there at the breakdown of the word anorexia, orex means appetite, so it's another way to remember that. And then leptin is how you feel when you don't have any food left on your plate. Thank you again, Mr. Woodard. You've eaten a meal, you're full, leptin is released. Leptin is the hormone that's going to say, I'm done, I'm out, I'm full. Okay, so it's the opposite of orexin and ghrelin. All right, the scientific study of sexuality. The bottom line on all of this is from a psychology point of view, and if you think about 1930s, 1940s, 1950s America, sex is a taboo subject. Not many people are walking around talking a lot about sex, but believe it or not, a lot of people are still having sex, okay? It's a biological drive. So a gentleman by the name of Alfred Kinsey actually had one of the main psychological studies concerning human sexuality. He interviewed 17,000 Americans about their sexual behavior. And when we say interviewed, he asked very personalized questions. Well, what this did was not only open up avenues to talk about sexuality, but it also opened up avenues to talk about really taboo subjects back then, things like adultery, homosexuality, etc. So he really was a groundbreaker as far as being able to talk about one of the primary drives that human beings have. He wrote a couple of famous books, thousands of studies and thousands of sexual histories in both males and females, and that opened the door for Masters and Johnson, William Masters and Virginia Johnson, to come along. Their main studies, literally watching thousands of people having sex. People, they paid to have sex, they were wired, and what they were looking at was the physiological response to sex. And they come up with what's called the sexual response cycle that you see there at the bottom of the page: arousal, plateau, orgasm, and resolution, followed by a refractory period, which is a period where the body can't engage in sexual activity anymore. Again, groundbreaking studies in the 40s and 50s that allowed people to start talking about this and really looking at what is the drive behind sexuality. All right, I've talked for almost a minute and a half, longer than I wanted to, so enough on hunger and sexuality.